But I would, yeah, we will start. Good afternoon, officially. Yes. It's good to be here. I'm Robert Buxton, and I like to start with an improvisation. And of course, today, usually when I improvise for you, it's a little bit in a comic way. I'll do happy birthday in the style of so-and-so, and we'll have a few laughs. But it's sort of hard. I can't do something comic today because of,
9/11.
yeah, 24 years ago today, some of us here maybe are from that area. I know we've spoken about, I'm from New Jersey, and I remember just everything from then and what a tragedy is. Every time the anniversary comes, you think about it and mourn. And also there's, troubling current events with so much violence. And so it's disturbing. And so I'm sorry that maybe we'll laugh later today, but I don't really have many laughs today. It's not a laugh day. It's a darker, bleaker sort of thing. And so maybe what we'll do is, again, I like to improvise. And if you give me a few random notes, I'll make a quiet improvisation. Just something. I thought about this though, when there's a tragedy, I don't really love the idea of, for example, playing a grand fantasy on, that's just not right. But something quiet and something respectful, I think, is the only thing. But anyway, so if you give me a few random notes, I'll do something with it. Well, I mean, I need letters. I need. But I was very well sung. Okay, B, and then a couple more. I'm sorry. A. Very good. C. Okay, maybe. What do you think? D. Yeah, let's do that. That's very, very simple and good in a good way. So, I'll do a little improvisation. I'm sorry to the people that sang beautifully. I didn't mean to cut you off, but. And speaking of quiet things, actually, I have to get music for this. I don't normally do this, but I thought I'd play you something that I wrote out. And I write a lot of things, and I never play it for people because, well, why play it when you can play Beethoven? That's really what I think. But I need the music. It's funny because I memorize everything except what I write. So here's a piece I wrote recently, and it's just a very quiet piece. I thought I'd play it if the pages can fit here. It started off something of an imitation of Brahms, and then it ended up not really sounding like Brahms. So it's called Ocean of Blue. It's based on a short poem by Jack Kerouac. So I went for just that image of an ocean of blue, that's all. And we'll see what happens. It's embarrassing to play things you write because it's like, do you ever hear your own voice on a recording and think, is that me? Well, same story doing this. And if I make any mistakes, you can forgive me, but I don't know if you've heard this before.
I don't think we'll know.
So. That was a little jittery, but that's one of the less crazy things I've written. So figure it's all right. So now I'm going to play, the regular program here, and I'll start with something that's pretty new for me. I have a couple new pieces since we last met. I wish it was more, but that's always how it is. This is a Mendelssohn song for voice, and because I can't sing in German, it's arranged by Liszt for solo piano, by Franz Liszt. So this is called On Wings of Song. It's an absolutely beautiful melody, and it's thinking about Mendelssohn and what he was like. He was born in 1809, lived only to be 38 years old. People's life expectancies were much shorter back then overall. And Mendelssohn was a big child prodigy. He may have been even more of a child prodigy than Mozart, if you can believe that.
Mozart was 8, I think.
Mozart was like 8, 7, 8, writing all these things. Mendelssohn was even more. And the thing with Mozart is they found that his dad helped a lot with his early compositions. And I don't think Mendelssohn had that help. So a true child prodigy is when someone's very young and they have the maturity that's beyond their years. In other words, you can go on YouTube and there's a lot of videos, and I'm not judging anyone, but there are a lot of people who have a lot of very young kids who have great skill at an instrument or a sport or whatnot. But to me, a true prodigy is someone who will move you and they get the emotional content. So for example, Yehudi Menuhin, the great violinist, when he was like 10 years old, if you listen to him play, he could make you cry because he had that maturity beyond his years. So it's not just technical skill, it's something else. And Mendelssohn was definitely like that. And Mendelssohn, although I didn't know him, I wish I could have, he was, from what I read about him and from hearing his music, playing his music, I think he was an extremely genuine person with no artifice. You'll hear it in this. And he did suffer a great deal with his background because he was Jewish, and the anti-Semitism prevalent at that time, and it's now Germany. He lived in Leipzig mainly, Saxony. And he converted because he felt really that he couldn't be himself, be who he was, his heritage, with the culture there. So it's just something to think about. But anyway, this is Auf Flügeln des Gesanges. I don't speak German really, so.
One more time.
Auf Flügeln des Gesanges. I'm saying it wrong probably. On Wings of Song. That's what it is. Maybe someone will teach me how to say that better. So here it is. Yeah.
In French.
Like Mendelssohn is, he is one of the names of the big names of composers, but in a way he's not appreciated, I think, enough. Partially, that's due to Wagner's attacks on him. And it's kind of persisted, the idea that Mendelssohn is just not. Wagner was very hateful and anti-Semitic and stuff. But at any rate, that's a different discussion for another day. So now I'm going to play some of Schumann's arrangements of Paganini, two of them out of the ones I've played for you already, and then one that's brand new for me. So I'll also have to ask a little bit of your understanding and forgiveness. So these are the two I'm going to start with from his, well, Schumann did 2 sets of arrangements of Paganini caprices. Maybe he wanted to do all of them, but didn't for some reason. He has an opus 3, which I've learned completely, and then an opus 10, which I'm working on now, and I'll play you the first of that. So Schumann was actually the first to take Paganini. As far as I know, he was the first composer to take Paganini and adapt it for the piano in 1832. He heard Paganini play, just like many of the Romantic generation. Paganini was born about 20 years before those guys. Schumann was born in 1810, Liszt 1811, Mendelssohn 1809, so they're all right there. And Paganini, who was much maligned by his contemporaries, he was loved by this younger generation. I read somewhere about the music of the hippie generation was mostly written by people born in the 30s and 40s, early 40s. Well, go figure. That they were older, so it's like there's this generational thing. Anyway, like Bob Dylan was born in 1940 or 41? And most of the people who were listening to him were born quite a bit later. But at any rate, that's a different story. So Paganini was, I've said this before here, he was like a rock star of that time. And for that reason, his flamboyant stage presence and performing and music, even the music itself, you either loved him or you hated him. And those who really didn't like him, they said he was possessed and all of this. So I'm going to play, the first piece of his is actually pretty sedate for Paganini. Paganini usually comes across as somebody who's had like 10 cups of coffee. Maybe he did because, he was from Tuscany and the coffee is quite good there. But this first one, it's a very pastoral, calm piece, I'm sorry. And it's reminiscent of guitar music too, because like there's that strumming effect. He was a great guitarist as well as a violinist, so he really was like a Jimi Hendrix of that time. He played the guitar too. He was like a rock star. So here's the first one. Thank you. The next one is a lot more wild. And it really sounds more like Schumann than Paganini. And this is something I think about, that arrangements, which I love to play. I love arrangements. And I especially love when the arranger is also a great composer themselves. And an arrangement is just like reading something in translation in literature. So here's an example of great literature translated by a great writer. Dante's Divine Comedy was translated by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And that is a good translate. It's not easy reading, I found. It's, because it's Longfellow, he makes it into a poem, just like the original. But that's an example of where you have a brilliant writer translating a brilliant piece of literature. And that's what's going on here. And any translation or arrangement has a spectrum of how close is it to the original. Well, that last one is pretty close to the original. The violin plays, the solo violin version that's the original by Paganini is pretty much, and then Schumann just, added some accompaniment. Well, this is pretty far-fetched from the original. So this is more Schumann than Paganini. And Schumann, it reflects Schumann's own character and his life, which was quite tragic. He suffered from bipolar disorder, and very, very sad, his life. So you feel it in this piece. Even though Paganini is there, but it's really Schumann. Here it is.
That's a lot of coffee.
That's right. Yeah, like you just said, that was one of the ones where Paganini had a lot of coffee before he probably. And Schumann joined as well. So the next one, this is the first of the second set. So Schumann, several years later, did more of these arrangements of Paganini. And this one sounds very much like a Chopin etude, which is nicknamed the Aeolian harp. I'll play you the Chopin, the beginning, and then the beginning of this Paganini Schumann. You tell me if it sounds similar. Same key of A flat major. So this is Chopin. Okay, this one. Yeah. I always have a moment where I get so confused that because they're so similar. They're so similar. Okay, I remembered it now. So it has the same peaceful, flowing harp-like quality as the Chopin, And the reason you have this, pieces, composers who lived at the same time. Chopin was born in 1810. Paganini was living in this time. You know, they breathed the same air, so to speak, or maybe even literally. And so there's a lot of overlap. There are cases of, there's this one movement of a Schubert symphony. I think it's the 7th Symphony by Schubert. And then there's a movement in Beethoven's 8th or something symphony, and they're almost the same. And were they copying each other? I don't think so, but it was just that they breathed the same air and came up with very similar things. And I think that's sort of how I view this. So here it is, another Paganini Schumann. This one's very new for me, and it's so tricky. It drives me crazy. It's beautiful, but it's just, yeah. Thank you. So more arrangements. These are some I've done for you in the past and will share again with you. This is César Franck, arranged by Alfred Cortot, the fourth movement of the Franck Violin Sonata, not to be confused with the Frank Sinatra, Madums, right? Franck Sonata, Frank Sinatra, it's very easy to, and this piece, Franck wrote in his later years. He was the opposite of Mendelssohn. He was a late bloomer, wrote everything later. And I love that too. I love the stories of prodigies, but I also love, and maybe even more, I love the stories of people who at 65 or 70 said, you know what, I'm gonna just start composing all these great pieces, because why not? And the thing is, Franck, most of his life, I think what I read about him was his father tried to make him into a child prodigy, and it just didn't work. And he became a very good organist. He was always a good musician. But for most of his life, he was a pretty soft-spoken, humble, very devout Catholic church organist. And he wrote music, but then in his last years, he just, had this explosion of creativity. So much so, and maybe I've told you these stories before, there are two stories about marriage that I think are really illuminating and kind of funny. That at a concert of his new works, probably the violin sonata was on it, but I think the piano quintet was on. His wife got furious at him because after the concert, she went to him and said, we've been married for 40 years, and that's you? All that emotion and passion? Where has it been? That's not you, and I just thought that was so funny. And then, speaking of marriages, he wrote the violin sonata as a wedding present for fellow Belgian musician, violinist Eugene Izay, who's a great composer too, And I think the story is that Izay actually played it, the whole thing, he sight read it at his wedding, I think. Actually, come to think of it, I'm not comparing myself to the great Izay, but at my wedding, people forced me to play something on the piano. I was happy to do it, but afterwards, my wife, who's also a pianist, said, why were you playing the piano at your wedding? It should, but at any rate, I just found that fun. But the story is this, that I never really understood why this worked as a wedding gift. The last movement that I'm going to play, compared to the others, it's a little more cheerful, but it's not a very cheerful piece. It's a very dark piece. It's a very heavy piece. It's a very intense, How does it work as a wedding gift? And I played this somewhere a couple months ago out in the country. And I told the group what I just told you. And this lady in the back stood up when I was done. And she said, oh, by the way, I said that the way this piece goes is it starts out innocent, and then it gets pretty dark, pretty fast. And then it actually resolves and ends up sounding innocent, it ends in a more innocent, happy way. So she stood up and she said, I know why he wrote it as a wedding gift. I said, why? She said, well, it's just like marriage. I said, what? Just like you say it. It starts innocent, and then it gets dark real fast, and then it resolves. And I just was biting my lip. I tried not to laugh too hard, but I said, you really explained the piece to me. And that's why I tell you, a lot of people, the biggest comment I get from people when I play somewhere is they'll say, I don't understand anything about music, but I like it. And I'll tell them the same thing, is that I don't understand anything about food, but I like it. It's the same thing. And I eat it. So that's the feeling about music. And then the second point to that is, I actually learn a lot more from what people tell me than anything else. Because you can read all the history books and all the stories of the composers, but what that lady told me made that piece click for me. Similarly, and I don't mean to ramble on, I was playing many years ago the Beethoven 32 Variations without that many wrong notes. And this lady came up to me and she said the same thing. I don't understand anything, but I said, but what do you want to say? She said, I want to tell you what I felt. And she said, I have synesthesia, which is where I have very strong associations of things with music. And I said, please tell me. She said, that Beethoven was popcorn popping. And I could smell the popcorn. I couldn't, and you know, there's parts like that. I can't hear it any other way. So I'm just saying, don't be shy if you have a thought like that and it comes to your mind. Please tell it to me because I may use it for future talks. Here is César Franck, the last movement of the Violin Sonata, arranged for solo piano by Alfred Cortot, very French. Actually, Franck was Belgian-born, lived in France, and Cortot was Swiss-born, but lived in France. So I guess they're not really French, but whatever. Actually, now back to Paganini in a way. And this is a piece you can't say it's an arrangement. I told you arrangement, it's a whole spectrum. This is the 18th variation from Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a Theme by Paganini, which is a set of variations. And he really takes a lot of liberty with it. And I'm working on a version that I'm sort of tweaking myself to do for solo piano, but this is just part of it. Eventually I'll do the whole thing. Might take a while. But he takes the famous 24th Caprice by Paganini, which is literally there in the beginning of the piece. But at the 18th variation, what he does is he turns it upside down. Meaning, if you take the sheet music, just those notes, and you turn the paper upside down, you get this. Different melody, different character. Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah.
To do that? And then what he does with it. And so Rachmaninoff wrote this in the 1930s at his summer home on Lake Lucerne in Switzerland. And I say that, and I also will say that Rachmaninoff suffered many bouts of depression, often related to his homesickness for Russia. He left Russia in 1917, never to return after the revolution. And, well, he had a lake house in Switzerland, so he was financially doing pretty well from concert touring. But he was longing and aching for his homeland, for his native culture. I read that he even struggled to learn English. He didn't even want to. Not that he didn't like, he lived mainly in America. He loved America, but he just was so culturally Russian. He just couldn't bring himself to it. One of his homes, I believe it was his home in Beverly Hills. He lived in some pretty swanky places, but he actually had it designed to be a replica of his home in Russia. So that's the power of nostalgia and memory on Rachmaninoff. And this is not just Rachmaninoff, it's many Russians. I can tell you my mom is Russian, and she will be nostalgic about pretty much anything, even the teapot she had to throw away 2 months ago. So, and then read any Russian writer, and it's all about this sort of dark, nihilistic longing and nostalgia. It's just part of it's in the cultural context there. So, this movement, to me, it's like a throwback to his earlier style, because Rachmaninoff in the 20s struggled to write. He did write, he wrote some revisions and arrangements, but in some sense his creativity had dried up because he had just left Russia. But in the 1930s, it came back. But his style changed. It was a little sharper, it was a little drier. Having lived in the US, he was influenced by the US. He was even influenced by Gershwin and Paul Whiteman and Art Tatum. He loved jazz, big secret. There's a story that somebody said, hey, you've got to go hear this guy, Art Tatum. And Rachmaninoff was, oh, no way. I don't listen to pop music. You've heard that line before. Probably, I say that myself too about things. No, you've got to go. And he went and his jaw was on the floor. How does this guy play the way he does? But at any rate, this 18th variation stands out. It's very different from the rest of this Paganini Rhapsody. It sounds like young Rachmaninoff. And for me, it's like a dream of going back to his past. We all have dreams like that, because even if you didn't have to leave your native country like he did, we all are exiles from home, because home is the time we came of age, not the place. I went back to New Jersey recently. It's all changed. It's not what it was. It's not. So that's what it is. And there's a movie, Somewhere in Time, which I have yet to see, with Christopher Reeve, that uses this music. Makes sense, doesn't it, considering the whole story of Rachmaninoff and being, lost in time or whatever. That's what it is. So here it is. Or at least I think that's what it is. I don't know. I didn't know Rachmaninoff personally. It's just my guess. Don't quote me on it. Thank you. Oh, sorry, what?
Hummingly beautiful.
Oh,
Hummingly.
Hummingly. I like hummingly.
You could hum with
Yeah,
it.
you can. Yeah, it's one of the rare things you could actually sing with. I don't think the Paganini would. I mean, the other Paganinis I played are very singable. But yeah, it's Rachmaninoff had this great gift for writing melodies, incredibly beautiful melodies. So so did Tchaikovsky, and he maybe learned it from Tchaikovsky. So they were close. Now I'm going to play something that's a little more fun, it's a little more sprightly. It's gypsy music. Zigeunerweisen, Gypsy Airs or Gypsy Songs by Pablo de Sarasate. And it's a famous violin piece, and it's not so famous on piano solo. And this solo version, somebody on the internet wrote out a recording, a piano roll recording that is, that George Enescu did of this. So that's where this arrangement comes from. I don't know who did it. It doesn't say on the sheet music. Somebody that's incredibly gifted, I'm very grateful to, but might have a lot of time on their hands to have done that. It's brilliant. So George Enescu was a Romanian violinist, composer, and pianist. And whenever I think of him, I think about my complaint. I always tell you that I wish I could learn the violin, but I'm too lazy to do it. But see, George Enescu was a brilliant violinist and pianist and composer, so I guess there's no excuse. If you get a chance to hear the music of Enescu, or Enesco, either way, listen. He's a genius, an overlooked genius. There are many, many of those. So this piece goes in a few stages. The first stage is a slow improvisational part that imitates the cymbalum. It's a gypsy instrument, an Eastern European folk instrument. That's the cymbalum sound. And then you have a couple slow dances. This one, no, that's not the one. It's so wonderful. And then another dance. So you have those couple dances, and then at the end, a very lively and fast dance to end. Gypsy music, klezmer music, it's all related from Eastern Europe. There's probably somewhere, and I'm not a historian, but there's probably some common roots of the music. And it's just infectious. It's wonderful. It's just great. I love it. So here it is. Well, thank you. Now I want to try a gospel song to play that's pretty new for me. This is, I'm going to do it's a work in progress, what I'm trying to say. This is How I Got Over, as sung by Mahalia Jackson. She sang it at the March on Washington. And I just keep listening to it. It's very complex. It's kind of repetitive, but it's so complicated. And I see what I can do. I don't even know if it's going to work, but it's a work in progress. Let's see what happens.
We all are.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Thanks. And to close, I'm going to do something that's not gospel, it's not classical. I don't play jazz much, but I love to listen to it. But I can sort of do like an early jazz style, a 1920s style stride piano. And I'm going to do the jazz standard, All of Me. I've been listening to Louis Armstrong and Billie Holiday. Maybe not the 20s, maybe the 30s is better, the early 30s. That's where I'm thinking. Modern jazz, I need another 50 years, I'll figure that out. But so here we go. Well, thank you for coming, and I will see you all next time. Thank you very much. I thought it was 3. I'm sorry. Thank you.
So when are you coming back?
Oh, in a month.